Hey guys, Extinct here with extinctmotorsports.com. Today we're going to do the installation of an inline thermostat on this Jeep JK behind me on behalf of our sister website, inlinethermostats.com. And after we finish our inline thermostat installation, we'll show you how you can quickly and easily remove or replace the thermostat in less than 5 minutes without losing more than a cup of coolant on the side of the road or the side of the trail, if God forbid you have to. Okay, let's get started. Okay, before we get started installing our inline thermostat in our Jeep JK, I wanted to show you what the kit is going to look like as you receive it from inlinethermostats.com. So the kit's going to come in a padded shipping bag, and this is the majority of the kit. It is going to come assembled, but this is not assembled for final installation. This is just loosely assembled so you have an idea of how the pieces fit together. I'm going to disassemble it here and just show you what all is included in the base kit. So the bolts will only be hand tightened, and they'll be easily removed. And so what you see when you take it apart, aside from the two housings, is there's two paper gaskets and a thermostat element. This element is a 180 degree element. That's the one we recommend. But of course, you can get any element you would like in 10 degree increments from 160 up to 190. Depending on where you live and how hot it gets, you might want a 160 or a 170, or if you live up north, you may want the 190. The factory Jeep element is actually a 195, and they are prone to failure. This element is a specially modified element specifically for inline thermostat usage, and it's got a small hole punched in it. If you do use an element from a different vehicle, you can. This is just the normal size for typical small block Chevrolet or small block Ford type element, but they don't usually come with a bleed hole. You need that bleed hole, drill about an 1/8 inch hole, but these are punched smooth specifically for inlinethermostats.com. We've got some optional parts as well. This is the optional reusable silicone gasket. We highly recommend this. The gaskets that come with work fine, but the best way to get them to seal is to use some RTV silicone on both sides of the paper, and it sort of makes it a little bit difficult to reuse the paper gaskets if you want to change your element, or for some reason your element fails and you need to remove it quickly and drive without an element for a little bit. The reusable silicone gasket lets you quickly replace the element or remove the element, put it right back together. No RTV is needed, and the element goes on either side of the gasket. Doesn't matter which side, both sides work just fine. You'll see that a little bit later in the video. This is another optional part. This is an optional sensor bushing. The kit comes with a plug in the sensor hole, because not everybody wants to run an external sensor, but maybe you do want to run an external sensor and you want to run an external temperature gauge, or maybe you want to run an external aftermarket fan controller. You can put a sensor right in here and run that controller. This bushing, most sensors are 1/8 NPT, the hole is 1/2 inch NPT. This bushing goes in here and lets you adapt your sensor directly into the kit. So that's everything the kit comes with, and we will put it together a little bit later during the video and you'll see us assemble it, but I just wanted to go over everything the kit comes with and what you should expect when you receive your kit from inlinethermostats.com. Okay, so these are all the tools that we are going to use today for our Jeep inline thermostat installation. So we've got a pair of hose clamp pliers to loosen the factory hose clamps. The screwdriver we're going to use to remove the scrivets from the grill. This is our hose cutting tool. I'll put a link in the comments on where to get this. I use these to cut the hoses. You don't need one. You can do it with a razor blade, but it makes it easier to cut the hose straight. We've got a couple of end wrenches. I'm going to show you how to tighten the bolts on the inline thermostat using these. Although you can use power tools as well. I've got my ratchet for removing the factory thermostat housing, and I'm going to use my power tool for loosening hose clamps and some of the bolts holding on the air intake tube and get those out of the way. And then I've got my a little bit of silicone for sealing the hoses to the nipples, and I like to put a little bit of silicone on my bolt threads so they don't never back out. So that's all the tools you need. You don't need anything more complicated than this to do the job. And so you'll see it as we're going through it. One last thing before we get started here today. You'll see at the end, the video is about 45 minutes long. I would say that you probably need to allocate about an hour to maybe 2 hours to replace or install the inline thermostat kit, assuming you're starting with your Jeep cold. And I wouldn't get in a hurry. Just take your time. It's a pretty quick couple-hour job, and it's easier if you let the radiator drain a little bit and get the coolant out, and take it a bit slower. Take your time assembling the thermostat. You'll see where we would do the thermostat assembly, and you just want to make sure that you take your time cutting the hose. Measure twice, cut once, get everything set up correctly. But generally, you should be able to do this in less than 2 hours. The other thing I want to talk about briefly before we get started is the gloves you'll see me using in today's video. For most of the video, you'll see me working in these Gorilla Grip gloves. They're just a soft, flexible glove with a grippy coating. I like to use those to protect my hands when I'm doing most mechanical work. They don't offer a ton of protection, but they do offer a little bit of protection against sharp edges and cuts. And there's a lot of sharp edges and opportunities to cut yourself on modern vehicles. Later in the video, you'll see me use these padded mechanics gloves. These are a little more heavy duty, and I wound up using these later in the video because I'm removing the thermostat element while the thermostat housing is very hot, basically 180 degrees, and it would burn me pretty badly if I touched it with bare hands. And it wouldn't take very long for it to go through these thin grippy gloves. But you can see this glove has padding on the finger sides, and I use that with the hot element because it protects me from the heat a little bit better. So I do recommend you protect your hands in this. When you work with your hands every day like I do, you have to take care to protect them, and especially if you're working on hot engine parts, it's always good to have these gloves with this protective padding to keep from burning yourself. Okay, so we're going to start this morning by draining our coolant so that we can catch it and not make a mess on the ground. So the way you do that on this Jeep is we're going to start by removing the grill so that we can get access to the drain petcock on the radiator. And the way you do that, there's these small, what they call scrivets, and you pull up this retainer like this, and then the whole retainer will pop out like that. And we're just gonna, there's just a row of them along the top edge of the grill, and we're just gonna remove those and then pop it out. Okay. And then what you do is you lean the grill forward, and there's some retainers at the bottom here and here and here. And we're just going to wiggle those loose. You kind of pull like that, and then the grill pops out. And then you twist your side marker lights out. And I'm just going to set that grill over to the side for now. And then the next step we're going to do is we're going to remove these retainers and move this panel out of the way so that we can get to the drain petcock. So these retainers are similar, but they've got this little screw device that you screw up. You take that out, and then your retainer pops up like that. Okay, so just like that. And then we're just going to slide this forward. We don't have to take it all the way out. We're just going to slide it forward. Now then, now we'll look at the petcock. Okay, the petcock is here. Okay, and you have to turn it 180, and there's a small nipple on the bottom that you can barely see here. And I'm going to slip a hose over that petcock so I can easily drain it into my bucket. So, let me get the hose on, and then we'll open the petcock and show you. Okay, so I've got this small section of hose, and I'm going to feed it up from below and get it on this petcock. So my camera may jumble a little bit here, but we're going to do the best we can with it, right? Okay, so you can just reach around from the left, and you can kind of, let me get my hand in here. You can see, and I'm just sort of feeding that hose up over the nipple. Yep. So not elegant, but as you can see, I've fed that hose up over the nipple, and it goes down past the, splash pan, so I can put a bucket under there. Okay, let's get the bucket under it, and then we'll open the petcock. Okay, so I've got my bucket under my petcock, and now I need to open that right there, the drain petcock, and it's a little bit strange. So the first 90 degrees, I'm using a pair of pliers because it's kind of hard to reach in there, but the first 90 degrees, it turns pretty easy. Okay, I'm gonna get my hand in there and I can turn it, and then they've got like a funny little step in the petcock, and the next 90 degrees, it's a little bit harder, but it sort of steps and pulls out. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna get it past the step point with the pliers again. There we go. And then you can open it up the full 180. Now once we get that open, and you can kind of see down there, it's beginning to drain into my bucket. Well, what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to open the radiator cap and speed it up a little bit. Now it's going to take a while for that to drain down, but we really don't need it all the way empty to be able to remove our hose. So while that's draining, I'm going to remove the air intake and the rest of the things that are in our way in getting to that thermostat housing. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to remove the engine cover here. We're going to remove this intake hose here. And then we're going to remove or loosen our hose clamps here. And then you can't see it now, but we're going to remove the thermostat housing from the engine and then remove the factory thermostat from within the housing. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to that. Okay, we're just going to pop up our engine cover like this. We're going to set that over to the side because we don't really need that. And then we're going to remove these two screws that hold the air intake hose to the cowl. Set that to the side because we also don't really need that. This hose is not going to be in the way once we get this housing out of the way. And so then we just need to remove our hose clamps. We're going to remove these two clamps here. So, okay, and there's one sensor wire right here that we need to, there's a clip, you push down on it and it removes just like that. We're just going to set that up there. And now we can get to our thermostat housing that's here, right? And we're going to remove this hose here. And then we can take that off and remove the thermostat inside. Now I'm using power tools today, but obviously the job is just as easily done without them. I'm mostly doing it for speed purposes. That's the first bolt. Now I've got a great big black pan under the truck. You might be able to see it. So I might not have let the coolant drain down enough because I know that I've got that large catch pan under there. So I'm just gonna disconnect it now and let the coolant drain into that large pan. There, you see like that? Now I'm gonna use my hose clamp pliers and remove the hose clamp and get the hose off. So just gonna move that back like that. We'll take our hose clamp tools. These are tools that have a hook and a point on the end. And the idea is you slip the point up under the hose because the hose sort of binds itself to the neck and you don't want to break the neck or damage the hose. And so by working this hook around, you sort of loosen the hose and then it will come off easier. It just sort of slides off of the neck like that. Okay, so now we've got our hose loose and we've got it's got a little bit of coolant in it. It's being held by it's being sealed in by the thermostat. I'm gonna drain it down into my pan that's under the truck. Okay, all right. And now you can see this is the factory thermostat element. And we're just gonna push down on that and twist, and that comes right out like that. Now we're just gonna put the hose and the housing back together and install our new inline thermostat. Okay, let me set this to the side. Okay, the next step in our project is to assemble our inline thermostat housing. We're going to start with the lower housing, and today we're using the reusable silicone gasket. And you'll notice it has a raised ridge on both sides. Both sides are identical. That seals against the housing, and then the inside of that there's a groove, and then there's another ridge where the thermostat itself seals. So I'm going to center this on the housing. Then I'm going to put my thermostat in it. Now the spring always goes towards the engine, and on this engine, that's this lower housing because the lower hose goes to the intake manifold, the upper hose goes to the radiator. So I'm gonna center that within the housing. That's just important to make sure it seals. And then I'm gonna put the upper housing on and put the bolts in. Okay, and then I'm gonna turn that over and I'm gonna put my nuts on, and I'm just gonna snug my nuts down a little bit with the wrench before I torque it. So I'm going to torque it with the torque wrench. You don't really need a torque wrench, but we've had some people over torque them a little bit, and so we specify a torque value of 240 inch-pounds. That also happens to be 20 foot-pounds. And I'm going to show you, actually, let me center that up a little bit before I tighten that, before I snug that down completely. So I'm going to show you first, I'm going to torque it to 240 inch-pounds, and then I'm going to show you how much force that takes. It's kind of hard to show force, it's more of a feel, but anyway, I want to do that because it's not so important that we're concerned about under tightening. We're more concerned about people over tightening, because we've had people over tighten housings and crack them. And actually on this particular installation, what you find when you're using the silicone gasket is the 3 pieces, basically we squeeze the silicone down, and then you've got 3 pieces of aluminum, the aluminum gasket shell, and then the 2 housings, and they're stacked. And you'll feel the bolts get very, very hard. They basically become impossible to turn any further. And if you continue to torque them down at that point, you're basically gonna crack the housing or split the bolt or something. So I'm gonna do it with the torque wrench. I'm gonna turn the torque wrench on, and you'll see that it comes up 240 inch-pounds. I'm just gonna do that to show you kind of, this is how much torque it's, we specify, but again, I think you don't really have to have it. You can just torque it until you feel the bolts completely stacked and then stop. Okay, that's that one. Okay, now I'm going to show you how much force it actually takes to undo that with just 2 end wrenches, right? So that's about the force. And so I would say, you don't have to do it with the torque wrench. You can feel it when the 3 pieces of aluminum get stacked tight. That's plenty tight right there. Okay, the next piece that's very important is you need to remove this plug and put some silicone sealant on it, because it doesn't come with any, and it's not adequately tightened to make sure it seals. This is a pipe plug, and you could just tighten it against aluminum and it would seal. I don't really like to do that. Might still leak. I much prefer to just use a little bit of silicone on the threads, and it will seal permanently. So ideally you would like to let this silicone cure 24 hours, but we don't have that luxury today. It will still seal, if you don't let it cure, but I like to just put it together and let it cure whenever possible, because it just forms a little bit better seal then. Okay, we're going to put our pipe plug back in. And again, this one is not one that really needs to be tightened all that hard. The silicone makes it seal very well. I'm just sort of snugging it down, and then you can just wipe that a little bit, clean up that silicone if you like, a little bit off the housing. Don't need that excess. There you go. So now that won't leak at all during our installation. Okay. Okay, just a word about reinstalling our factory thermostat housing after we've removed the factory thermostat element outside of it. There's this rubber seal that seals the factory thermostat housing to the engine, and make sure that on this truck, when I took it apart, the seal stayed on the engine side, which is fine. It might come off on the thermostat housing side. There's a groove that it goes into here. So, just pay attention to that. And then all we're going to do is we're going to just install our thermostat housing back in the factory location without the guts in it, because we're using the inline thermostat element. And then we're just going to tighten it down. The top one is a little bit difficult to get to while maintaining my camera angle. Okay, we've got our factory thermostat housing reinstalled. I will mention there are cast aluminum housings available separately. They're not available from inlinethermostats.com, but they are on Amazon. I'll put some links in the chat. These plastic housings do deteriorate with time, and they'll crack and break. You may want to consider installing a cast aluminum one at this time while you're doing the the inline thermostat. We still recommend doing the inline thermostat because it's got several benefits from moving the thermostat element from down here where it's not so easy to get to up here where it's much easier to get to. But we'll talk about that later. Okay, so now we're going to install our inline thermostat into our hose. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the thermostat basically right in this corner because it's sort of shaped like the hose, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the hose, and then I'm going to cut the hose so that I get the thermostat in the right position. And so, you know, what I do first is I look up here, and what you'll notice is you can sort of see it. There's a stop on the housing here. And so I want my hose to come to that stop. So I'm going to mark that right there. I'm going to cut that hose right at that point, and then it slips over that, okay? So I've got this hose cutting tool that makes it a little bit easier to cut hoses, but it's fine to do it with a razor blade. You just might want to, you know, there's the old saying about measure twice, cut once, but also you can't uncut something. So you could start a little bit further back and then trim it up with your razor to make sure it's straight, right? But I'm just going to cut through my hose here because I've got this nice little hose cutting tool that makes nice square cuts. Okay, I've got my top hose cut, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit. I'm going to slip that in there so that I can get the positioning correct on the lower hose. Okay, got that done, and now I can see, and I'm going to move my lower hose to the front a little bit so that I can position it correctly and cut that lower hose right where I want it. So, okay, now that I've got it in position, it's kind of hard for you to see, but I'm gonna mark it where it comes up to the notch. Okay, and then I'm going to remove the hose so you can see what I'm doing here. And make the cut. You can see sort of exactly. You see, I'm going to make it so that I'm going to make this cut so that we've got this straight section of hose going onto the new thermostat housing. Okay. Nice square cut. Okay, I'm going to take my complete hose off and do my test fit. Okay. Now I'm going to put it back on the put the lower hose back on the nipple that I've reinstalled in the engine. First, and then I'm going to put it on the upper nipple. And so what you see is, once we've got it installed correctly, this housing sits up nice and high. And this is going to give us a couple of benefits. One, we've got easy access to this sensor port if you want to use an external gauge. And two, it's got us easy access to the bolts and the housing, and we can replace the thermostat element or remove the thermostat element while losing minimal coolant. All the coolant is basically below this point, unlike where I showed you earlier that we had had to remove the factory thermostat housing and all that coolant gushed out, right? Now it's up here. Everything underneath the thermostat is sealed in the hose, and we're not going to lose more than this much coolant. Even then, if I was doing the job, I would lift the hose up a little bit. I'll show you later in the video, and I'd lose very, very little coolant. So now we just need to put our hose clamps on, and I'm going to show you a little trick to seal up your hoses nice and tight, and then we'll reinstall our air intake hose and our grill and refill the system with coolant, and we'll be ready to do a test. Okay? Okay, now you can see the positioning of the inline thermostat after we've reassembled our hose. Now we reused the factory spring clamps in this installation, but Inline Thermostats offers accessory stainless screw clamps if you want to put those back on instead of struggling with these spring clamps, which can be a bit of a pain to get over the hose nipple with the hose installed. But you can see we've got it back on our factory thermostat housing. We're going to pull our wire up here that connects to our air intake hose. But you can see the factory spring clamp goes right on there, tucks in nice and tight, and we've got a nice, easily accessible location to get to our thermostat housing. So now we'll put back our air intake hose on, our grill, and refill with coolant, and we'll be ready for the test. Okay, now you can see with everything back together, the intake hose is on, the engine cover is on, and here's our inline thermostat up nice and high where we can get to it if we need to. Now we're going to go ahead and get it warm, and then we're actually going to remove the thermostat element and show you how easy it is to remove or replace the thermostat element on the side of the road or the trail if you ever need to, and put it back together and keep going with no leakage very quickly with minimal loss of coolant. Okay, now that we've got our inline thermostat installed and it is up to temperature, I am going to shut the engine off, bleed the pressure off, and remove the thermostat element and reinstall it to demonstrate how quickly it can be done on the side of the road or the side of the trail. So first thing we're going to do is measure the temperature on the heater hose here, where we've got the coolant. And so we've got a 180 degree thermostat in it, and the temperature is running about, let's see if we can see it, about 174, 175, so pretty close to our set point. So it's hot. And what I'm going to need to do now is I'm going to need to shut it off and bleed the pressure off. So we'll start by shutting off the engine. Okay, now we've got the pressure off, and the next thing we need to do is bleed the pressure off of the system. So a word about safety: bleeding pressure off the system. 175 degree coolant can burn you very badly. And when you open a radiator cap, if you do it suddenly, it's going to have a little eruption of coolant. So what we do, the safe way to do this is you take a towel and you lay it over your radiator cap. And you're going to open your radiator cap a quarter turn, and that's going to release the pressure and let it bleed off. And so now if the engine's very hot, you're going to get a lot more pressure bleed. But you can see I've got my cap loose. It bled off a little bit of pressure it had. Now I can safely remove the cap completely so that I know it's safe for me to work on the thermostat. Okay. So then the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the thermostat element and then replace it. So this time I'm going to use hand tools because this is what you likely would have on the side of the trail. So we're going to hold the nut on the bottom with the box end wrench, and then access the bolt on the top with the ratchet. Okay. That one's loose. This one's a bit tighter. Now, one of the things that comes in the kit, we use a flanged nut, so the box end wrench will hold it for you quite nicely. Okay, now what you might be able to see is, alright, there's my other nut. I'm going to zoom in for this part so that you can see very clearly. We're going to lose almost no coolant. So let me, I'm going to remove this. What you can see is we get a few drips and drabs of coolant coming out. Let me move my engine shroud up out of the way. I capture my bolts. Now this is hot, so that's why I'm wearing gloves. Quite hot, it'll burn you. There's my thermostat element, and you can still see it's open, quite open. There's my gasket. Okay, and I lost, I don't know, less than half a cup of coolant. All right, so now we're going to put it back. And the most important thing with putting it back, to make sure that you get a good seal when you put it back, is you want to get your element centered in your gasket. Okay, so I'm going to center my element in my gasket, and I'm going to put my gasket in the housing half, right? Now I'm going to pull up on this a little bit. Let me put this out over here out of the way. I'm going to pull up on this a little bit so I can see it better, but not too much, because I need to get make sure it's centered in my gasket like that. And now I am going to, you know what, let me put that out of the way. Okay. It's centered in the gasket. Now I'm going to put my bolts in my upper housing so that when I put it all back together, of course, you have to always have one bolt that decides it's going to hop down out of the way. Luckily, I had my drain pan in the truck. Okay. There's my bolts in my housing. My thermostat is centered. Now I just need to get my bolts lined up in my bolt hole on the lower housing. Lift this up a little bit. Got that in there. Put my nut on the lower, on the bolt on the bottom side. Okay, that's the nut on that side. I'm actually going to use my wrench to hold my nut in place on this side. I'm going to start it with my bolt. I'm only going to make that finger tight because I want to do a little bit of centering the gasket in the housing and just make sure everything's centered so that I don't get any leaks when I tighten it down. I can kind of feel the edges on the gasket. Okay, that feels pretty good. And you can sort of feel with this gasket and these bolts in this housing, you basically tighten and then it reaches a hard stop. And you don't want to tighten much past that. Okay, we're going to tighten our radiator cap again and go start the truck. All right, we've got a little bit of seepage out from under our gasket, so I'm going to loosen it up and try to center it a little bit. Nine times out of 10, when you've got that, you might have dislodged the thermostat, you know, in the relative to the center of the gasket. I may have to take it apart, center it again. So let's see if we can get it quickly and just centering the gasket up a little bit. So we're going to put the gasket centered on the housing. We're going to put our thermostat back in the center of the gasket like this, so that when we put all our bolts back in, it's going to be centered back up. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my bolts in my top housing so that I can help align this when these two go together. Check that again. My gasket, my thermostat moved a little bit on me. It's a little bit of an angle in the Jeep engine compartment, so it can be a little bit challenging to get all of this lined up. But again, the most important thing is making sure that we have the thermostat aligned in the center of gasket. Okay, got those in there. Put my nut on from the bottom. Okay, got that one. I'm going to use the wrench to hold this one on this side a little bit. I don't quite have as much access. Bit difficult. before we tighten that up, I'm going to center my gasket up a little bit in between my housings. Yep. There we go. And let's start the truck. Like we've got a leak-free seal, so we're going to call that a successful demo.